If I were ever to become a motivational speaker, I think I'd end every speech with the words, or, I don't know. Maybe I lack the confidence for the job, but I think I'm mostly just tired of people telling me they have all the answers. Go online today and you'll see hundreds of influencers and thought leaders grasping for your attention. And they all seem hell-bent on pitching you their secret, trick, or hack to double your income or 10x your biceps. It's everywhere. Quick results, rapid weight loss, overnight success. I think that's one of the reasons why I was so hesitant to put my voice out there in the beginning and to start making original videos online. If history has taught us anything, it's that the people that preach from a pedestal often have the most problems. So I've always tried to be upfront from the beginning. I don't have all the answers. I'm not a self-help guru, and I don't even like calling myself an expert. I'm just a guy that's obsessed with change. And I think it's because for most of my life, I've felt stuck. It was 2010. I had just graduated from college with $97,000 in student loan debt. I was living at home in my parents' basement, struggling to become a professional filmmaker, and I did the smartest thing I could think of at the time. I bought a brand new car. And a leather jacket. As good as I looked in that leather jacket, I felt trapped. Many of my friends were venturing off to their new jobs with starting salaries, and I was going back to where I started. I felt worthless. Then I plugged my finances into a wealth calculator online, and with my car and student loans, I realized that I was actually less than worthless. I was also unfit. I'd start a workout program and then fall off the wagon within a couple weeks. I never made time to read, and I ate like shit. There was so much that I wanted to change about my life, but I didn't know where to start. I felt like I was drowning in shoulds. I should just suck it up and get the corporate job so I could get the flashy apartment with all the nice things that make you look successful. Or maybe I should get that loan so I could buy the fanciest camera on the market so I could finally be taken seriously as a filmmaker. It all felt so overwhelming, confusing, and out of reach. And then, a few weeks after I moved back home, I was up past 1 a.m. watching a show called Last Call with Carson Daly. You know, the guy from TRL? Maybe I'm dating myself here. Anyway, he's interviewing this guy named Tom Shadyac.
So you are one of the most successful directors in Hollywood.
I like starting an interview that way.
Tom's talking about his story, how he had this amazing career in Hollywood, had the massive mansions and all the stuff that he thought he'd ever want. And I'm just sitting there thinking, that's all the stuff that I want. But he explained that it didn't make him any happier.
All right, here's our model. Get whatever you can, take whatever you can, get as much as you can, win, win, win. That's the model. So I was held up as a model of success when I won.
You did that. I mean, you had a big fat mansion in Pasadena, right? I mean, you had the big crib and you let it go. You sold it.
Let it go.
Where do you live now?
I live in a beautiful mobile home park in Malibu. It's not about suffering for the sake of suffering. It's what is simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. That's the three keys to the spiritual life. So I don't have this thing on my back that you're talking about.
This was the first time that I'd heard anything even close to something resembling minimalism. I thought it was the most radical idea in the world. Like, it sounded crazy. How could he just get rid of all of his stuff? It wasn't long after I watched that interview that I started to find out about all these other people who were living minimalist lifestyles. Most of them were bloggers with really clever names for their websites. There was Zen Habits, Becoming Minimalist, and Be More with Less. I discovered that there was this growing movement of people talking about simple living. And right from the beginning, I was hooked. It really started with just one question for me. What would happen if I simplified my life? From there, I took my first step towards living the life that I wanted, not the life that everyone told me I should want.
What's going on right now? This is hard to explain. Basically, I'm just getting rid of all my stuff.
It started in my parents' basement. I went through and sold, donated, or trashed over 80% of my stuff. To be fair, I really didn't have that much stuff at the time, but it was truly a turning point for me. And that's because it changed basically every decision I made from that point on. I started to get intentional not just about the stuff in my life, but the kind of life I wanted to build to begin with. How could I start to turn around my eating habits, my fitness routines, my finances? And not too long after this, out of the blue, I got an email from a guy named Joshua Fields Milburn, who wrote a blog called The Minimalists.
1098-765-4321.
And he had an idea. He wanted to make a documentary about his upcoming book tour. Think the Rolling Stones on tour in the peak of their popularity. Except a lot less drugs, groupies, and crowds, and more intentional conversations in bookstores. We jumped on a call to talk it through, and I pitched a bigger idea. What if we made a documentary about this entire movement of people calling themselves minimalists? It was way more ambitious, and to be honest, I wasn't even sure if I was ready for it, but I wasn't dumb enough to tell him that. He agreed to the idea, and so we got started.
Are you Tiffany?
I am Tiffany.
Awesome, nice to meet you. This is Matt.
I'm Matt. How are you?
He has a big camera with me.
It's not that big compared to theirs.
We hit the road traveling thousands of miles across the United States, interviewing some of the very people who inspired me to get started on my own self-development journey. As a young kid making his first documentary, it was absolutely mind-blowing. These were my idols.
So I'm Leo Babauta.
My name is AJ Leon.
I'm Tammy Strobel.
I've always been fascinated with change. Why are some people able to turn their lives around, but others get stuck? I was surprised to find out that many of the people that I admired had struggled just like I had.
So I think back to myself, 2005 is when I really remember a picture of myself when I was about 70 pounds heavier, so I was overweight, I was unhealthy.
I had gained a lot of weight. I was unhappy.
I got depressed.
I can tell you many years were bleak, to say the least.
I couldn't change any of my habits, and I couldn't figure out why.
Here's a quote from entrepreneur Jim Rohn that goes, "If you don't like where you are, move. You're not a tree." One of the greatest gifts we have is free will, the ability to choose our lives. But as much as we have the power of choice, change isn't always easy. For many of us, our thoughts, beliefs, and habits are so deeply ingrained that trying to change them can feel like pushing a rock uphill. We try to change ourselves, our lives, or our habits by doing something different. And sure, at the start, it can be pretty easy. The sense of novelty keeps us going in the beginning. But the second we hit a roadblock and stumble, we tend to give up. We tell ourselves that it wasn't meant to be. And then we're right back at square one. As I began to sit down with all these different writers, creatives, and entrepreneurs, I started to spot patterns. Like Tetris blocks lining up into perfect rows, I started to see what overlapped in each of their stories and how they were all able to create meaningful lives on their own terms. I noticed that each of them had 5 things in common that helped them to push through the discomfort of change. And it always started with just one step. They began to ask questions, and not just any questions, big, uncomfortable, life-changing questions.
Well, question number 1, are you happy? Are you satisfied?
What would it look like in 5 years if we did this now?
What do I want to be doing with my life?
For some reason, this doesn't come naturally to us. It's easier to continue along our path, to be willingly ignorant and sedated to other options that might be more fulfilling. Because quite frankly, asking these kinds of questions is really uncomfortable.
You have to kind of reflect and see what is going on inside of yourself, because we end up being this, a series of unconscious decisions that we make throughout the day. I want this food because it looks delicious. I want that new product because the commercial was awesome, right? There's all these urges that we have and we just act on them. And there are these unconscious impulses that we're letting dictate our lives.
I think back to when I was living in my parents' basement, buried in debt. I felt like I had to prove to everyone and prove to myself that I was successful. And my recipe for success at the time was pretty straightforward. Make a lot of money and buy a bunch of stuff. Then I'd be happy. But once I started to ask myself these confronting questions, I wondered where these ideas came from in the first place.
Success, you get to define on your own. Back in my old days, the corporate days of yesteryear, even though I had an impressive job title, I was the director of operations for 150 retail stores, I didn't feel successul. I was ostensibly successful, but I didn't feel fulfilled because I didn't feel like I was really growing in the ways that I wanted or needed to grow. And I also felt like I wasn't contributing beyond myself. I wasn't contributing to others in a meaningful way. And so I knew I had to change that.
I think we've only begun to re-examine what it means to be successful in life. It's no longer that white picket fence, and I think people are beginning to recognize that they've maybe been tricked and that they maybe have more agency over their options than they once thought they did.
But what kind of questions should you be asking yourself? A good place to start is examining all the things that society, your family, or online influences have told you that you should want, or care about, or strive for. We often accept these as our reality without ever stopping to question why. So ask yourself, what would I do if nobody else would ever see it? What is the first thing I think about in the morning? What keeps me up at night? When does life feel most effortless? Even if I had everything I could ever dream of, what's one thing I would still need to be happy? So when I started to ask myself these questions, it helped me get clear on the one thing that was weighing me down more than anything else: my debt. I realized that the financial pressure I was facing was adding stress to my life. It forced me to take on work that wasn't fulfilling, and it made me work longer hours than I wanted to, which in turn left me with less time to build healthy habits. So when I got straight with my values, I was able to come up with a goal. And not just any goal, a big, stupid, damn near impossible goal. I committed myself to paying off my debt in just 2 years. All $117,000 worth. So much for slow growth, right? I couldn't help it. I just wanted to get out of debt and get out fast. But it wasn't enough just to think about it or to hope for it. If I was gonna pay off 6 figures of debt in a really short time frame, I was gonna need a plan to get from point A to point B. And that's where step 2 came in. Nearly all the people we interviewed put their vision down into writing. Asking questions is great, but once you start to think critically about what you want in life, you need to create an actual plan.
We just started with a blank sheet of paper. I know it seems like a very rudimentary thing to do, but we just sat down and we said, okay, well, if I could have a do-over at life, a mulligan, what would I do? It forces you to deal with the filter of like, what do I actually want? What do I want my life to look like? I started writing, and not publicly on the web. I was too much of a coward to do that. So I just started writing in this private moleskin, these essays I call them, but basically they're just letters to myself, to a younger version of me. And through writing, I started to form my ideas and what I really wanted and what I stood for in life, and that served as like this really binding thing that helped me cobble together a Frankenstein of a company called Misfit, which is all the things I enjoy.
We met Jesse Jacobs on our way up the California coast. After working at a tech company for many years, on a rainy Seattle day, he had an epiphany.
I looked around me and realized that this was not an existence I wanted to maintain any longer. It lacked the soul I was looking for, the day-to-day connection and overall meaning. I knew what I didn't want to do at that point, didn't know what I did want to do, but it gave me the breathing room just to step back and begin exploring that.
That exploration, the exploration to find meaning, began with a pen and paper.
I'm a big fan of mind mapping and journaling and just going from head to hand to paper, more than even a computer. And I think that literally, like you said, asking the questions and trying to find deeper and harder questions to ask and having no expectations, having no actual outcome in mind, but saying, all right, what makes me happy? What do I enjoy with myself, with my friends, out in the world? What don't I enjoy? What do I see other people needing? A big need I saw ringing true was people's unhappiness in their day-to-day was glossed over and masked by alcohol and caffeine. So you get jacked on caffeine, your double espresso frappuccino in the morning, and you mellow out, socialize, and relax with 3 martinis at night. And the high energy and the high doping allow you to get numb to the pain of the 12 hours in the day. And I would just see that. I recognized it in myself, and I would see it around me, and I realized, like, wow, am I in the matrix, or am I the only one who sees that? That seems like a BS way to go. So therefore, flip it in the positive. What do I need? What do these people need? Well, they need connection. They're actually looking for genuine human connection. They're looking for meaning. And if I took a step back, I realized even further, how do you do that as a business? How do you try to then answer those needs and solve those problems? And it turned out for me, the manifestation was in tea. Tea has been a way for thousands of years for people to connect in a way that's more mindful and slower than coffee. So for me, asking the hard questions, going deeper, and just looking at, selfishly speaking, what do I need? And tea was that answer.
There's a good reason why nearly everyone that we talk to put down their thoughts, dreams, and goals onto paper, and it's because it works. In a study from Dominican University of California, Dr. Gail Matthews put participants into 2 groups, those who wrote down their goals and those who didn't. Participants who wrote down their goals were 42% more likely to achieve them than those who didn't. There's something about putting your ideas onto the page that makes them real. It's no longer just an idle wish anymore. The writing method doesn't really matter as much as the action itself. AJ wrote free-form letters to himself, whereas Jesse used a more visual mind map to bring his ideas to life. I personally tried out a few methods. I started a journal, wrote letters to myself, and even created lists, like jotting down all of my deepest fears. What matters most is that you get what's inside your head down onto a page. While there are no concrete rules, I have found that there are a few things that will help you get the most from this process. First, don't police yourself. Remember that your vision is for your eyes only, and it's gonna evolve over time. It doesn't need to be perfect. In fact, striving for perfection is just gonna keep you stuck. Give yourself permission to do what director Judd Apatow calls the vomit pass, and just spew your words onto the page in a stream of consciousness. If it helps you break through writer's block, you can even set a timer for 30 minutes and just fill up the pages until the time goes off. Next, create a system to stay organized. Once you've got your vision onto the page, that's when you can go back and organize it. After all, you're gonna wanna make sure that you can reference this vision at any time in the future when you feel stuck and you don't know what step to take. If you're a list person, then it might be prioritizing your goals with numbers. Or if you're a journaler, maybe it's taking photos of your entries and organizing them into a digital filing system like Notion. And finally, don't forget to enjoy the process of writing in and of itself. There are so many amazing benefits from writing, from improved mental health to better memory and communication skills. So try to stay open-minded about the process and know that it's helping you in more ways than one. So we were driving around the country talking with people about how they let go of their material possessions on their path to becoming minimalists. So it's no surprise that one thing came up over and over again. These people really knew what it meant to let go. And that's the next step that's vital to making any significant change in your life. Once you've asked yourself the tough questions and you've put your vision onto the page, the third step is to let go of anything that's not that. And the benefits you uncover from this process will be far greater than a clutter-free home.
I was talking to a friend early on about this journey and just said, man, I never realized how getting rid of physical possessions was gonna focus my intentionality and was gonna force me to ask some really difficult questions. And he responded just by saying, yeah, minimalism forces us to define what's valuable. It forces us to define what we want our life to be about, because we can't decide if we're gonna keep something unless we decide, what do I wanna be doing with my life? And it was one of the most life-changing benefits.
They let go of much more than just their stuff. They also let go of their expectations, fear of failure, doubt, past versions of themselves that they were clinging on to.
I didn't care what happened. I didn't care if it was a success, if the album, the music we were making, people listened. I didn't even care. I just wanted to make music, and this was a way for me to make music. Someone was saying yes to me, you know, come make music, and I wasn't gonna say no.
For you, letting go might mean finally putting down some of the excess baggage that you've been carrying around. Your self-doubt, guilt, past failures, or self-limiting beliefs. When I sat down to start journaling, one of the most powerful exercises I did was to write a letter to myself, forgiving myself for getting into debt. I still vividly remember that letter to this day. I got so emotional that I started crying while I wrote it. I told myself that it was okay that I messed up. It was okay that I had gotten into a stupid amount of debt. But this was the time to let go and move on. This was the time to look towards the future. And so I reshaped my perspective of my debt. Instead of seeing it as a burden, I saw it as the single greatest challenge of my life. To determine what to let go of, you first need to figure out what to keep. You may have heard of the hell yes rule created by entrepreneur Derek Sivers. This is a simple yet effective framework for figuring out what to keep in your life and what to eliminate. It's pretty straightforward. Anything that feels like an instant hell yes for you, whether it's a memento, side project, person, or opportunity, it gets to stay. Anything short of that, well, it might be time to let go. After you've figured out your hell yes items, it's time to actually let go. To do this, you can either ditch, declutter, or defer. So first, ditch anything that flat out isn't serving you. The negative self-talk, the habits that keep you stuck, or the obligations that leave you feeling depleted. Of course, this can be easier said than done, but by setting the standard that you no longer have the space for these things in your life, you can more easily push them away when they arise. Next, you need to delegate. We've all heard the expression that one person's trash is another person's treasure, and that's exactly what we're talking about here. The things that no longer feel good for you, but they would feel great for somebody else. Maybe it's that work project that doesn't really excite you, but would be an absolute dream to a newcomer to your industry. Or the pair of shoes that's sitting in the back of your wardrobe gathering dust, but your cousin is always asking about them. Or that weekly accounting task that makes you want to gouge your eyeballs out, but someone on your team would be so happy to manage it. By delegating these things onto people who value them more than you do, you can empty your own cup while filling up someone else's. And lastly, we have to defer. This is for the things that don't really feel right at this particular point in time, but you don't want to say never to. They might be dreams, projects, or ideas and opportunities. You can put these into a someday pile, so you can let go of them for right now and move your energy and time onto things that are more pressing and important. One thing that stood out to me about everyone we interviewed was that they all had an ambitious vision for what they wanted their lives to look like. No one wanted to live a life of a hermit or disconnect themselves completely from society, nor did they want their dreams to stay dormant on a piece of paper. They had to actually bring that vision to life somehow. They had to take action. I met Colin Wright on the road. He's an author, podcaster, and knows a few things about taking action. In his early 20s, at the beginning of his journey, he had a profound decision to make.
Right before I left Los Angeles, it was one of those stark, almost movie-worthy type of situations where I had basically the finish line of the race that I was running right within reach. And I was offered an opportunity to be the protege of this guy who is incredibly successful and who I have a massive amount of respect for professionally. And then on the other hand, I had just bought my ticket to Argentina. And so I had in hand these two opportunities, these two things that I could, just by choosing, just by saying one way or another and committing one way or another, I could either succeed wildly at the route I'd been trying to succeed wildly at for years, or I could throw all that away and head in this new direction with no guarantee of success, with no guarantee of what success would even look like, and I didn't have any trails to follow. And I kind of recognized as I was comparing these two lifestyles that even though this untread one I might not have a metric in which to measure success there yet, and there's a very defined metric over here. Even though there is no metric, I would probably still be better off pursuing that because I knew what winning would be over here, or at least chances are what winning would be. Whereas over here, I had much more flexibility. It seemed far more likely that I could find something, find a definition of success that would actually get me to a place where I was both successful and just incredibly happy.
Taking action almost always means taking a leap into the unknown. And to do that, every part of you is gonna fight with you to keep you in your comfort zone. But you have to understand that clarity can only come through action. We often spin our wheels and overthink things that we need to do. We think about all the things that could go wrong or right, what people are gonna think of us, whether or not it's gonna work out. But none of these thoughts actually help us. While you should have an idea of the direction you want to head, you don't need to know exactly how you're going to get from point A to point B. As Martin Luther King once said, you don't need to see the whole staircase, you just need to take the next step. Your path is likely going to have detours and side steps, but you won't know that until you start taking action. Don't be afraid to start small. You don't need to make any groundbreaking decisions or movements immediately. What's going to be far more effective and sustainable is to consistently make those marginal gains over time. When I was getting out of debt, I didn't throw all of my earnings at my loans at once. Instead, I slowly but consistently put aside money to knock off one loan before moving on to the next. Imagine if instead I just spent all day worrying about that massive $117,000 figure. I never would have gotten anywhere. Instead, I just focused on those small steps that I could take each day, and that made my goal and my dreams more realistic and attainable. So you have to remember that many of the people that we interviewed were my heroes. I know it might be kind of nerdy to idolize bloggers, but that was the impact that they had on my life. But one of the first things I realized after meeting them was how strikingly ordinary they were. And I don't mean that as an insult. I saw that they were imperfect people that didn't completely have their shit together. Sure, they managed to make significant changes in their lives, but they still made mistakes. And holy shit, was that a relief, because my life was filled with those. That's when I realized that they all found ways to stay consistent, even after they slipped up, because we all eventually slip up. Obviously, it's easy to stay consistent and motivated when you have that initial burst of inspiration and novelty pushing you forward. But how do you stay on track during those difficult days when all you want to do is give up? It really comes down to three key things. The first is focusing on building habits, because when motivation fails us, as it often does, it's our habits that will help us get back on track. If you've already developed a habit of putting money to the side or working out or eating healthy, you know that you don't have to think too much about it. It'll just become second nature. It's what you do no matter what the circumstances are. The next step is to get inspired regularly. So find books, podcasts, songs, or movies that instantly remind you why you're doing what you're doing, and have those at the ready every time you need a pick-me-up. From the very beginning, when I started to pay off my debt, I committed myself to reading one personal finance book every year. It wasn't so much about learning something new as it was about getting a reminder to stay on the path. And the final thing you need to do is set up a really strong accountability system. So identify those people in your life that can help to nudge you back on course when you find yourself falling off, whether it's a friend, a family member, partner, or colleague. 4 years after I graduated college, I paid off every last student loan and sent out my final car payment. It was 2 years later than my initial goal, but I couldn't really be disappointed. I was now debt-free. With that weight removed, I was able to experiment more, to work on projects that fulfilled me, to spend more time working on myself, and to even build up the courage to finally put myself on camera and to start making original videos. When I think back to a younger version of myself, just out of college, I felt hopeless. I felt like I didn't know which direction to head in. But luckily, I found some great mentors along the way who helped to nudge me in the right direction.
I am able to wholeheartedly pursue whatever catches my interest like a bullet.
I'm doing what I love, but it's also taken a lot of work to get to where I am.
My work is my life, and it's not in a workaholic sort of, there's no end game. I'm not trying to make a gajillion dollars.
I don't think there's anything more beautiful than somebody who's able to devote their life to their life's passion.
I think there are frontiers of well-being that we haven't discovered yet personally and collectively. We don't know how good human life could be.
Sometimes we're overwhelmed by choice, right? And that's where we look for a template as opposed to creating our own template. And to me, that's where real freedom is.
One thing I recognize is that everybody wants to change the world. They just have to be given opportunities to do so. And of course you can change the world. We all have the power to bend the fabric and the threads of reality in our favor.
At the end of the day, it's really up to you to start the process of getting unstuck. You need to ask the right questions, come up with a vision, create the plan, take action, and stay consistent on your journey to discovering the best version of yourself. Or, I don't know.